If you've never felt the cold, suffocating grip of fear creeping down your spine in the middle of a shift, knowing that something, or someone, is standing just beyond your sight in a place that should be abandoned, then you've never worked the night shift at the Burger King off Route 50 in West Virginia, a place so remote even the wind refuses to visit. But that's not the worst of it. The rules they gave me, the ones you must follow to survive, are the only things standing between you and a nightmare that's been waiting for decades. There's a certain stillness to this place, a strange heaviness that clings to the air long after the sun sets. I'm not a paranoid person, not really, but after a few shifts at this remote Burger King, I could feel the darkness press in on me in a way that made me start doubting everything I thought I knew about the world. The manager, Mr. Thompson, handed me a crumpled sheet of paper on my first day. I didn't think much of it at first. It looked like the kind of generic handout you get with any fast food job. But as he read the 6 rules to me with a grave expression, I began to realize that this wasn't any normal Burger King, and this wasn't any ordinary job. Here's what he told me. Rule number 1. If you hear someone knocking on the back door, do not answer it. No deliveries are scheduled during the night shift. Rule number 2. Should the fryer turn on by itself, unplug it immediately and do not look into the oil. Rule number 3. If a customer enters wearing a red hoodie and orders a special combo, inform them that the item is unavailable and offer no alternatives. Rule number 4. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. do not enter the walk-in freezer under any circumstances. Rule number 5. If the intercom begins to emit static and a voice calls your name, do not respond. Turn off the intercom and leave it off for the remainder of your shift. Rule number 6. At exactly 4:44 a.m., you must stand in front of the counter and recite the phrase, "I acknowledge the presence of those who came before." Do not skip this step. These rules were non-negotiable. The moment I signed that paper, Mr. Thompson's eyes locked onto mine with a gaze so cold, so filled with warning that I could feel my pulse quicken. "Follow them, and you'll make it through the night," he said. "Break even 1, and I can't promise what will happen." I thought he was just trying to spook me, but I quickly learned he wasn't joking. The first few shifts were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin itch, the kind that makes you feel like someone's watching you from just out of sight. The flickering fluorescent lights above would hum and buzz, casting shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls in strange, unnatural shapes. But I told myself it was nothing, just the usual weirdness that comes with working in a 24-hour fast food joint in the middle of nowhere. But then came that first knock. It was just after midnight, and I was restocking the ketchup when I heard it. A single, sharp rap on the back door. My heart immediately started pounding. I froze. The rules ran through my mind like a checklist, and rule number 1 echoed loudly in my head. No deliveries were scheduled. No one was supposed to be here. I slowly walked to the back, my shoes tapping softly against the tiles. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a low scratching sound, as if someone or something was trying to drag something heavy across the floor outside. My fingers hovered over the doorknob, but my hand shook with fear. The sound was unnerving, like something out of a nightmare. I remembered Mr. Thompson's warning. If you hear someone knocking on the back door, do not answer it. I had no idea what was on the other side, but I wasn't about to risk it. So I stepped back slowly and took a deep breath. I had to follow the rules. I turned and walked back to the counter, trying to shake off the unease settling deep in my gut. The knock continued for another minute, then abruptly stopped. I kept glancing toward the back door, convinced I saw shadows moving beneath the crack. I couldn't tear my eyes away, but I knew better than to look too long. I stayed in the front of the store, far from that door, my heart racing. The minutes felt like hours. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had started. I waited for a moment, longer just to be sure. When nothing happened, I took a shaky breath and tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the wind maybe, or an animal. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. My eyes never left the back door, and I kept checking the clock, waiting for my shift to end. But it was a long while before that finally happened. And That was just rule number 1. The next night, I was back at the same Burger King, the same flickering lights, the same unsettling atmosphere. As I stood at the counter, something strange happened. The fryer, which had been off for hours, suddenly roared to life. The sound was so loud, so sudden that it made me jump, nearly knocking over a stack of cups. The oil bubbled furiously, far beyond the normal fry cycle, spitting hot grease onto the sides of the fryer. My instincts told me to shut it off immediately. But as I reached for the power switch, I remembered rule number 2. Should the fryer turn on by itself, unplug it immediately and do not look into the oil. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I had seen the fryer turn on like this before, but the rules warned me not to even look at the oil. I wasn't sure why, but there was something deeply unsettling about the fryer's unnatural activity. I unplugged it without looking into the bubbling oil. My eyes stayed glued to the ground, my hands trembling as I disconnected the power. The fryer stopped immediately, but the smell that filled the air was unmistakable. It wasn't the usual greasy scent you get when cooking fries. This was something darker, something foul, as if something had been burned inside the fryer, something I didn't want to think about. The buzzing hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed louder now. The shadows stretched unnaturally, flickering, like the world around me was beginning to distort. The fryer was still, its oil frozen in time, and for a moment I almost thought I heard a voice. Low and whispering, coming from the fryer itself. I quickly turned away, reminding myself to focus. The fryer was off now, and the rest of the night passed without incident. But the unease never left. I kept hearing those whispers, feeling eyes watching me from the shadows, but I didn't dare break the rules again. There's more, though. I could tell you about the strange man in the red hoodie who came in the next shift. He wanted a special combo, and when I told him we were out of it, he didn't blink, didn't flinch, just turned and left without a word. I could tell you about the odd voice on the intercom calling my name, static crackling in its wake. But those stories will have to wait for another time. For now, just remember this. The rules are there for a reason. Rule number 1 kept me safe that night, but I don't know what would have happened if I had broken it. All I know is this. Something is watching. Something has been watching for a long time. And if you ever work the night shift at that Burger King, you'll feel it too. It wasn't long after that first night when the fryer turned on by itself. The feeling of being watched hadn't let up. In fact, it only grew stronger. Every creak of the floor beneath my feet, every low hum of the fluorescent lights above, seemed amplified in the stillness of the restaurant. And it wasn't just the eerie quiet that got to me. It was the way the walls felt. Thicker, as though something was pressing against them from the outside. I couldn't shake the thought that something was watching from the corners of the building, something that never let its gaze leave me, even when I thought I was alone. The fryers, those huge stainless steel monsters, had been off all evening. I had checked them earlier and found them cold, still as they should have been. But somewhere between the unease and the whispers of the shadows, I'd almost forgotten the importance of the rules. I was still learning. Rule number 2 was simple enough, but it's one of those things you don't really believe in until you're standing there, heart racing, watching the fryer hum to life on its own. It was 11:45 p.m. The kitchen was mostly quiet, the steady tick of the clock the only sound. I was wiping down the counters, cleaning up the stray napkins that had been left behind from earlier. I had finished all the prep work. Nothing was supposed to happen. The store was dead silent, almost too silent. Then, without warning, the fryer roared to life. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as the familiar sound of the oil bubbling rang out louder than it ever had before. The fryer, which had been cold just moments ago, was now hot and active, hissing like a living thing. It shouldn't have been on. No one had touched it, and I hadn't seen anyone near it since the last round of fries was cooked hours ago. I stepped back, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The fryer was louder than it should have been, like something more than oil was boiling inside it. It wasn't the normal sizzle of potatoes. No, this sound was deeper, more guttural, like it was trying to force its way out of the machine itself. I thought of the rules. Rule number 2. Should the fryer turn on by itself, unplug it immediately and do not look into the oil. My hand hovered over the switch. I wanted to look inside just to see what was causing the noise. But rule number 2 echoed in my head, a reminder from Mr. Thompson that I had learned the hard way. Do not look into the oil. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier. The smell, usually greasy and comforting, turned foul. It wasn't just oil now. There was something else. Something sickeningly sweet in the air, a sharp tang that made my stomach turn. I could feel my throat tighten as I forced myself to look away, not daring to let my eyes wander toward the bubbling mass. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of. The oil was just oil, right? But something about it felt wrong. I reached for the plug and yanked it out. The fryer immediately stopped, its sizzling dying down with a sudden silence. The room, once alive with the sounds of hot oil and grease, was now unnervingly quiet. But the stench lingered in the air, thick and nauseating. It was then that I realized something. I had never seen the fryer stop so quickly before. Normally it would take a while for the oil to settle, but this time it had just cut off. No slow winding down, no quiet hum of the heating element cooling off. It just stopped. And in the moment of silence that followed, I felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere, like the room was holding its breath. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The quiet that settled in the restaurant after the fryer went silent was the same kind of stillness I had felt earlier, the kind that gnawed at the edges of your sanity, making you question what was real and what wasn't. I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper coming from the fryer, something too low to make out, but loud enough to feel like it was directed at me. It wasn't a human voice. It was something else. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the fryer, too afraid to move but too afraid to stay. My eyes never left the machine, my breath shallow. Then I remembered rule number 2 again. Do not look into the oil. I quickly turned, my back to the fryer, and went to the sink, trying to distract myself, trying to focus on something normal. But I couldn't escape the feeling of that presence, that sense of eyes, unseen but undeniably there, watching me from behind. The sound of the fryer, that unnatural hum, still echoed in the back of my mind. I continued my shift, but the unease was palpable. Every time I glanced toward the fryer, I could feel the weight of it, as if it was waiting for me to make a mistake. It wasn't until later that night when I made the connection. The fryer had been behaving strangely for days, but I had dismissed it. It was just old equipment, right? Just a malfunction, maybe. But I had never seen anything like that before. There had been a deep, resonant hum, one that wasn't caused by the fryer at all. No, there was something in that fryer, something that didn't belong. The whispers from the fryer, the way the oil had almost seemed alive, made me wonder what was in there. What could be hiding inside, just beneath the surface? The fryer wasn't just a machine. It was a conduit, a portal maybe, and whatever was inside it, whatever came out of it when the fryer turned on by itself, was not something I wanted to confront. I made it through the rest of the night, but barely. My eyes kept flickering toward the fryer. Every creak of the floor beneath my feet made my heart race, and the slightest sound, even the hum of the lights, set my nerves on edge. When my shift ended, I left the restaurant faster than I had ever left any job. My hands were shaking, my skin crawling. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was just letting my imagination get the better of me. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of the fryer in my mind. It wasn't just the oil. It was what had been in the oil, what had been stirred awake in that fryer. And I knew deep down that I wasn't the only one who had noticed. The fryer had a presence. It was calling something. Something old. Something hungry. Something that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. As much as I wanted to forget it, I knew I wouldn't. I couldn't. The rules were clear. Do not look into the oil, but I had already broken something. I had already looked too long, even if I hadn't physically gazed into the fryer. The oil, the hum, the strange sensation in the air. It was all connected. I wasn't sure how much longer I could survive this job, the way the rules hung over me like a dark cloud, suffocating me with their weight. But Rule No. 2 had kept me alive that night. It had kept me from doing something worse, and for that I was grateful. Still, the friar wasn't the only thing I had to fear. The rest of the night was only beginning, and I would soon learn that Rule No. 2 was only the first of many terrifying encounters to come. I was still shaken, still trying to process what had just happened with the friar, and my nerves were shot, frazzled, hanging on by a thread. The rules felt heavier than ever now. Not just words on paper, but a grim force that had begun to sink its claws into me, gnawing at my every move. As I wiped down the counter, my mind kept flickering back to the friar, to that terrible hum and the whispers I swore I heard in the silence of the kitchen, but I couldn't linger on that. I couldn't. The sound of the bell above the door ringing broke my thoughts. My heart skipped a beat and I froze. The clock on the wall read 2:15 a.m. Who could be coming in this late? And why? I straightened up quickly, wiping my hands on my apron. The door opened slowly, the hinges creaking like they hadn't been oiled in years. The place was nearly empty, save for the occasional trucker stopping in for coffee. But this time, the man that walked through the door was different. He didn't have the usual tired look or the rugged appearance of the long-haul drivers that passed through. No, this guy was off. He was tall, almost unnaturally so, and wore a red hoodie. I noticed it right away. It was just so out of place. And it wasn't like he'd thrown it on quickly for the cold. The hoodie itself looked old, worn in a way that made it seem like it had been through 100 winters. His face was obscured by the hood, but I could see the faint outline of his features beneath it. His steps were deliberate, slow, but they echoed throughout the near-empty restaurant. He didn't glance at the menu or make small talk like most customers. He just walked up to the counter, his eyes never leaving mine, as if he knew exactly who I was, even though I had never seen him before. He leaned in a little, almost as if he was trying to get a better look at me, and then he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "I'll have the special combo," he said, his words cutting through the air with an unnatural sharpness. "You know the one." I felt a chill run through me, and for a moment I was frozen. The word special combo rang in my ears. Something about it, about the way he said it, set my heart pounding. My stomach churned in response like a knot was being tied there, squeezing tighter by the second. I tried to swallow down the panic that was rising in me. There was no such thing as a special combo on the menu. None. But the way he said it made me feel like I was supposed to know what he meant. It was like he expected me to know exactly what he wanted. Like he knew something about me that I didn't even understand yet. My hand went cold as I reached for the register, my fingers trembling. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask him what the hell he meant, but I couldn't. It was like the air around us thickened, making it impossible to speak, to breathe, to think. I remembered Rule No. 3, my mind snapping to it like a rubber band pulling back after being stretched too far. Rule No. 3. If a customer enters wearing a red hoodie and orders a special combo, inform them that the item is unavailable and offer no alternatives. I could feel the rule press into my chest like a weight. I couldn't deny it, I had no choice. I opened my mouth and the words came out before I could stop them. "We're out of that item," I said, my voice coming out tight, almost strangled. "We don't have that combo. I can offer you something else." He didn't react at first, he just stood there, his face still obscured by the hood. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them on me, boring into me, through me. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us stretching long and uncomfortable. Then finally, he spoke again. "You can't offer me anything else," he said, his voice a low growl. It was almost as though the words were meant to be a command. "You'll give me what I asked for." I could feel the tension building in the air, as if the entire world had become still, frozen. There was something terrifyingly wrong about this man, something deeply off. My pulse quickened, and I could feel my hands shaking. But I couldn't stop following the rule. I couldn't. I glanced toward the back for a moment, looking for the manager or anyone who might help, but the store was empty. Just the man and me, alone. Like I said, I stammered, my breath shaky. We don't have that combo. It's not on the menu. I forced a smile, though it felt wrong on my face. Can I get you something else? He tilted his head, slightly as if considering it. Then his voice dropped to a whisper, cold and thick with menace. You can't refuse me. I'm not asking for food. I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'm asking for something more, he continued, and I could hear the twisted smile in his voice. And you know exactly what it is. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could feel my heart beating louder now, thundering in my chest. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. It was like the air had turned to lead and every part of my body was frozen in place. The man reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled something out. Something small, smooth, and glinting under the fluorescent lights. It was a coin. But this coin wasn't ordinary. It shimmered with a dull, unnatural light, like it was made from something that didn't belong in this world. It was old, too. Older than anything I had ever seen. The moment it hit my line of sight, my blood ran cold. He placed it on the counter slowly, with purpose, and I couldn't help but stare at it. It was almost as if I was hypnotized. But I couldn't look away. Something about that coin, something about it felt like it was calling to me. He leaned closer, the smell of cold, damp earth filling the space between us, his breath warm against my face. You'll give me what I want, he said again, his voice like gravel scraping across metal. And if you don't, there will be consequences. You'll regret it. I guarantee it. A surge of panic struck through me. My body was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stay here and let this man get whatever it was he wanted from me. But I couldn't break the rule. I couldn't. I glanced down at the coin and then back at the man. I felt the coldness of his gaze, even though I couldn't see his eyes. I opened my mouth to speak, to say anything that would get me out of this. But I couldn't. The words died on my lips. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man in the red hoodie turned and walked out of the restaurant. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and as he reached the door, he stopped and looked over his shoulder. He said nothing. He didn't need to. But I understood. I knew what he meant. He had gotten what he wanted. I stood there staring at the coin on the counter, my breath ragged in my chest. It had all happened so quickly. Too quickly. My hands reached out involuntarily, my fingers brushing against the coin, cold and heavy, as if it were a part of something far older and far darker than I could ever understand. The door slammed shut behind him, and the world seemed to breathe again. The lights above flickered, and I was left standing there alone, the coin still lying on the counter untouched. And I could feel the weight of rule number 3 pressed down on me, like a stone in my chest. Whatever had just happened, whatever was going on in that restaurant, it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. The heavy silence of the restaurant pressed down on me, thicker now than it had been before. The man in the red hoodie was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, lingering somewhere in the dark corners of the store. A sense of dread crept over me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, as if I had become a part of something much bigger than myself, something I had no control over. The eerie stillness of the room felt suffocating. My breath came in shallow bursts, and the cold sweat that had been gathering on my skin began to drip down my back. I glanced nervously around the restaurant. The lights above flickered again, the fluorescent hum echoing in the silence. The coin, that strange, cursed thing, still lay on the counter, glinting as if it had its own malevolent energy. I didn't dare touch it again, even though I was drawn to it, its chilling presence almost whispering at me from across the room. The clock on the wall read 2:30 a.m. There was something about this time, something about the stillness in the air, that sent an unnatural shiver down my spine. The dread settled into my bones as I scanned the restaurant one last time, my eyes darting nervously to the walk-in freezer at the back of the kitchen. I didn't know why, but I felt pulled toward it. It was as though the freezer was calling to me, beckoning me to enter, to step inside. But I couldn't. No, rule number 4, I remembered. The memory of the words hit me like a slap to the face. Rule number 4. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. do not enter the walk-in freezer under any circumstances. I could almost feel the rule suffocating me, the command in it more urgent than ever. The freezer was off limits during this time. It didn't matter that I had to grab something from there to stock the shelves, or that it would make my job easier. The rule forbade it. And just like that, the air around me seemed to grow colder, a heavy weight settling on my chest. Something was wrong. I felt it deep in my gut, an instinct, primal and cold. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, even though the restaurant was still and empty. I couldn't escape the feeling that the freezer, that thing, held some dark, twisted secret, something that no one was meant to know. I turned away from the kitchen door, trying to shake the anxiety from my body. But I couldn't. The icy grip of fear clung to me like a second skin. My breath was shallow, my hands clammy as they wiped against my apron. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, making the lights flicker once more. It was as if the entire world had become distorted. The clock seemed to tick louder in the silence. 2:33 a.m. There was no one else around. The other employees were long gone, their shifts finished hours ago. It was just me, alone, in the vast emptiness of the restaurant. The freezer door loomed in the background, an ominous presence I could not escape. The strange buzzing in my head returned, a low hum that made my teeth ache. The air felt thick, charged like something was waiting for me to make the wrong move, something dark, something ancient. I could hear the faintest scraping sound from behind the door. I glanced at the clock again, 2:35 a.m. My body stiffened. That was when I heard it, the faintest click. It was coming from the walk-in freezer, a mechanical noise like the sound of something heavy shifting, something that shouldn't be moving, something that was out of place. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze. I stood there paralyzed, unable to make a sound. I couldn't even bring myself to breathe. The hum in my head was louder now, buzzing with urgency. My mind screamed at me to move, to leave, to run, to do anything that would take me far away from this place, but my body wouldn't obey. I slowly turned my head toward the freezer, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of darkness to spill out, wrapping around the edges like smoke. For a moment, I was sure I could hear something inside, something moving, scraping against the metal walls, the sound of something breathing. My hand instinctively reached for the intercom, my fingers trembling. But then I stopped. The rules were clear, I couldn't go in. Not between 2 and 3 a.m. The freezer was off limits, and I had no intention of breaking another rule. But my curiosity, it gnawed at me. What was in there? Why couldn't I go inside during these hours? What was hiding in that cold, dark place? The thought gnawed at my mind. I fought the urge to open the freezer door. I fought the sickening pull toward it, telling myself that this was just my imagination running wild, that the sounds weren't real. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The freezer wasn't empty. It never was. And then, as if in answer to my thoughts, I heard it. A voice. Soft at first, almost too faint to be real, but unmistakable. Help me. My blood turned to ice in my veins. The voice was faint, raspy, as if it had been trapped inside the freezer for far too long. But the words were clear. They were desperate, desperate. Help me. The voice was so soft, but I could hear it now, coming from inside the freezer. It wasn't just a whisper. It was a cry for help. My chest tightened as panic surged in me. I knew I couldn't listen. I knew the rule was clear. No one is allowed in the freezer during this time, but the voice kept calling out. I could almost feel the cold of the freezer radiating toward me. as if the thing inside was reaching out trying to pull me in. It was luring me. I stepped backward, slowly, my eyes never leaving the door. The faint scraping noises grew louder, more desperate. "Help me!" The voice rasped again, its pitch rising now almost to the point of screaming. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door to the freezer creaked, and for a moment, I thought it might swing open. My heart stopped. I didn't wait to find out. In that instant, everything inside me screamed at me to run, to leave, to get out of there before I became a part of whatever nightmare was unfolding. I turned and bolted, running as fast as I could, my breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. I didn't dare look back, but the voice still echoed in my mind even as I pushed myself into the front of the restaurant. "Help me!" It called again, louder as though it was right behind me. My chest tightened, my stomach churning with dread. I had narrowly escaped whatever lay in that freezer, but I knew that I hadn't escaped the place, the rules, the darkness that seemed to lurk behind every corner. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in this restaurant, and I wasn't safe. Not anymore. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, the cold sweat on my skin now a constant reminder of how far from safety I had drifted. The voice that had come from the freezer still lingered in my head, like an echo, bouncing off the walls of the dark, empty restaurant. "Help me." It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a plea, one that clawed at my mind, forcing my thoughts to spiral. I didn't know what was happening in that freezer, or what had been lurking in the shadows, but I knew now with absolute certainty that I wasn't alone. There was something in that restaurant, something that had been here long before I had, something that wasn't going to let me leave without getting what it wanted. I stumbled over to the counter, leaning heavily on it as my breath came in short, frantic gasps. The weight of the rules was suffocating, pushing down on me like the air in a vacuum. Rule number 4 had been the latest in a long line of horrifying experiences that I couldn't explain. But what else was out there lurking just beyond my reach? What would the next rule demand of me? My eyes darted nervously to the intercom, the device that had once been a simple tool for customer orders. Now it felt like an instrument of torment. I couldn't stop glancing at it as if it might spring to life at any moment, as if it was waiting for me to make the wrong move. Then just when I thought I could breathe again, the unmistakable sound of static filled the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was soft at first, just a faint crackle, but then the static grew louder, like an invisible force was moving through the room, gathering strength. The intercom hummed to life. It wasn't the usual voice I heard when customers placed their orders. This voice was different. It was distorted, as if the speaker were somehow submerged in water, muffled and faint, but clear enough for me to hear the unmistakable words that sent a chill down my spine. "Come to the counter," the voice rasped. "Come to the counter, Daniel." The static filled my ears, overpowering the sound of my own heartbeat. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I didn't want to move, I didn't want to answer, but my name had never sounded so wrong before. It sounded off, warped, like it was being dragged across a twisted, broken version of the reality I knew. "Do not respond." The words of rule number 5 flooded my mind, and I gripped the counter with both hands, my knuckles turning white. Rule number 5 was clear. If the intercom begins to emit static and a voice calls your name, you do not respond. You turn it off. You leave it off for the remainder of your shift. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. There was no time to think about what was coming next. I couldn't allow myself to engage with whatever was on the other side of the intercom, whatever thing was reaching out to me from the static. I had already broken so many rules tonight, but rule number 5 was one I wasn't about to risk. I reached for the intercom's power button, my fingers trembling as I pressed it, shutting off the static. The silence that followed was so profound, so deep, that it felt like the entire world had stopped moving. For a moment I thought it might have been a mistake, that maybe I had imagined the voice or that the static was simply a technical glitch. But the fear in my gut told me that wasn't true. The voice had been real. The voice had been calling for me. Still, even as I cut the connection, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, that something was waiting just out of sight, ready to strike. The air in the restaurant had become thick, like it was suffused with a tension that I couldn't escape. It was as if every corner of the room was drawing me in, slowly, methodically, pulling me into its twisted embrace. I glanced at the clock again. 3:45 a.m. The night was far from over, and I could feel that familiar sense of dread creeping over me again. I'd made it this far, but I didn't know if I could make it through the rest of my shift. The rules hung over me, an oppressive weight that pressed down harder and harder with each passing minute. What else was I supposed to do? What other horrors awaited me in the dark, empty corners of this remote Burger King? Suddenly, the intercom crackled back to life again. I stiffened, the blood in my veins turning to ice. No, I had just turned it off. I wasn't going to fall for this. I wasn't going to listen, but the voice, it came again. You must acknowledge. This time the voice wasn't calling my name. It was different. It was like a command, a cold, calculated demand, laced with something darker than I had ever heard before. I could feel my breath quicken, my pulse hammering in my ears as I took a shaky step back from the counter. Why wasn't it stopping? You must acknowledge. The words repeated in the same eerie tone, an undeniable insistence that reverberated through my entire body. It wasn't asking anymore, it was telling me what to do. For a moment, I closed my eyes, willing the sound to go away. I thought about rule number 5 again, trying to push everything else out of my mind. But the urge to respond was overwhelming, like a primal instinct I couldn't fight. Something deep within me pushed me forward, toward the counter, toward the intercom, toward whatever was lurking just beyond the static. I couldn't resist. I stumbled toward the intercom, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I reached out for it again. The silence around me was suffocating, pressing against my ears, filling my thoughts with nothing except the cold, static hum of the intercom. The moment I touched the button, the static surged louder, as if it had been waiting for me to give in, but I stopped. I remembered the rules. I remembered rule number 5. I couldn't respond. I couldn't engage with whatever this was. I pulled my hand back from the intercom, taking a deep breath. The urge to speak, to acknowledge the voice was still there, but it was fleeting, disappearing into the depths of my mind as I forced myself to turn away. I moved quickly, determined to leave the intercom behind me, to escape whatever this was. I had broken enough rules for one night, but the moment I turned around to head toward the back room, the intercom screeched to life again. This time, though, it wasn't the distorted voice I had heard before. This time it was louder, more insistent, and it was angry. You must acknowledge. The voice snarled like it was ready to rip through the air, tearing everything apart. There is no escape. The static screamed at me. My heart nearly stopped. I couldn't outrun it. The only thing left to do was obey. But I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. The static faded, not stopped, faded, like a storm pulling back over the ocean, but still boiling beneath the surface, waiting to return. The angry voice that had screamed at me was gone, for now, but it left a silence in its place that was worse. It was a silence full of knowing, of expectation. A silence that waited. I looked at the clock. 4:33 a.m. 11 minutes. 11 minutes until the final rule. Until rule number 6, the final test, the final ritual. Whatever this place had become tonight, this haunted tomb posing as a fast food restaurant, it was counting down. And so was I. I tried to steady my breathing. My legs felt like wet sand. My hands trembled violently as I paced in a tight circle near the front counter, trying not to look at the intercom, trying not to glance toward the freezer door behind me, or the coin still gleaming on the countertop, like a cursed artifact from another time. I had obeyed the rules. Not perfectly, but enough to stay alive. Barely. The man in the red hoodie. The voice in the freezer. The whispers over the intercom. The shadows that moved when I didn't. It had all been building toward this. I could feel it. The air buzzed with tension, electric and heavy, as though the restaurant was holding its breath, waiting, watching. The lights above hummed but didn't flicker anymore. They were steady now, as if the building had accepted what was coming. As if it was ready. I wasn't. My eyes locked on the digital clock above the Friar Station. The red digits blinked. 4:37 a.m. 7 minutes. 7 more minutes of pacing, of trying not to lose my mind, of resisting the pull of the whispering things just beyond the lights. I could feel them, hovering like fog behind the walls, pressing against the glass windows, watching from the corners of my vision. They were gathering, preparing. I glanced at the counter where I'd have to stand. My spot, my altar. That was what it felt like now. Not a register where you took orders and handed out fries, but an altar where I would either appease the ancient forces that governed this cursed place or what? What happened if I didn't say it? What happened if I skipped rule number 6? No one had told me. The rules were warnings, not explanations. You didn't get details. You didn't get to understand. You followed the instructions and hoped they were enough, and I was terrified they wouldn't be. 4:41 a.m. 3 minutes. The hum of the overhead lights deepened, growing into a low, vibrating drone, almost like a chant. The walls seemed to contract as if the whole restaurant were breathing slowly, rhythmically, in time with something ancient and unseen. I could feel it beneath the floor. Movement. Not footsteps. Not people. Something deeper. Something vast. I stood up straighter. This was it. 2 minutes. I made my way to the front of the counter, my feet dragging, my knees locking with each step. The digital clock watched me like a red eye as the seconds bled away. I reached the register and stood still, my hands flat on the cool surface. I felt the coin nearby, radiating its strange coldness, untouched since the man had left it behind. And then the lights above me dimmed. Not flickered, dimmed. The overhead fan stopped spinning. The buzzing intercom let out a single soft breath of static and fell silent again. The temperature dropped, sharp and sudden, and behind me, I heard them. Footsteps. Not one pair, not two, a crowd. Dozens of slow, deliberate, impossibly silent footsteps all moving in sync. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I knew if I did, I'd break whatever fragile barrier existed between me and them. They were behind me now, lining the walls, crowding the tables, standing in the kitchen, watching, just watching. The lights flickered once, and then the clock blinked. 4:44 a.m. Time stopped. Not in the literal sense. No breaking of reality. No surreal tearing of the world. But inside me, time froze. My heartbeat was the only thing I could hear, thundering in my ears like a war drum. My breath caught in my throat. And then I remembered the words. I didn't know who had come before. I didn't know if they were past employees or customers or sacrifices. I didn't know what these things watching me even were, but I knew I had to say it. And I had to mean it. My mouth was dry, but I forced the words out. I acknowledged the presence of those who came before. The moment I said it, the lights surged back to full brightness with a snap, the hum roaring into the air like a breath held too long. The temperature shifted, warming slightly, just enough to let me feel the blood in my veins again. I didn't turn around. Not yet, but I could feel them. Still behind me, still silent, still waiting. I repeated the phrase, louder this time. I acknowledged the presence of those who came before. And this time, the world responded. The walls creaked. The floor pulsed. The coin on the counter spun on its own, slowly, slowly, like it was acknowledging me in return, or judging me. The shadows behind me leaned closer. I could feel them, ancient, shapeless things pressing into my mind. And then, a whisper. Just one. Not cruel, not angry, just tired. He remembers. And with that, they began to leave. The pressure in the room eased like air escaping from a sealed vault. The footsteps receded, fading back into the distance, returning to whatever spaces they haunted before. The air warmed, the light settled, and I was alone again. Really alone. I sank to my knees behind the counter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep them flat. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring at nothing, letting the silence hold me. The digital clock blinked. 4:45 a.m. It was over. Somehow, impossibly, I had made it. The night was done. The shift was finished. The rules had been obeyed, all of them. I don't remember cleaning up. I don't remember clocking out or locking the doors behind me. I don't remember driving home. All I remember is that when I stepped outside, the sun was beginning to rise, casting soft light over the parking lot, over the road, over the world that had somehow gone on spinning. I didn't look back at the restaurant. I didn't need to. It would still be there, waiting. Always waiting. And tomorrow night, someone else will take the shift. Someone new. Someone unaware. Someone who'll read the rules taped beside the back office and laugh, maybe. Or wonder if it's some kind of hazing ritual. But if they're smart, they'll listen. And if they're lucky, they'll survive. Because the ones who came before, they're still in there. And they're still watching.